1. The beginning of a perfect family. The Harringtons were the picture of middle-class success. Thomas Harrington, a senior architect at a prestigious firm in Boston, had built a career from the ground up. He was married to Emily, a former nurse turned part-time philanthropist, who managed the household with a calm, disciplined grace that matched his own. Their 2 children, Rebecca, 19, and Daniel, 16, were thriving students. Rebecca, a talented art student at the Rhode Island School of Design, and Daniel, a star soccer player at a local high school. For years, their life seemed to be a well-ordered narrative of small triumphs and quiet joys. The family owned a lovely colonial house on a quiet street, and their weekends were filled with garden parties, Sunday brunches, and visits to the nearby art museum. No one in their circle thought there was anything to be feared. Emily's colleagues at the hospital admired her for her dedication, and Thomas' friends at the architect's office respected his reputation for integrity. 2. The accidental encounter. It was on a crisp October evening that Thomas' world began to shift. He had accepted an invitation from an old college friend, Danny McCleary, to a charity gala hosted by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The venue was a grand hall with crystal chandeliers and a stage that glittered like a jewel. Emily was not invited, as the event was strictly adult only. Thomas, however, found himself pulled into the crowd as he entered. The air was heavy with perfume and excitement, the sound of music vibrating through the walls. While sipping a glass of champagne, he spotted a woman standing near the stage, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Her eyes met his and lingered for a moment before she smiled, a gesture that felt almost supernatural. Her name was Victoria Hartman. She was a young, strikingly beautiful woman, working as a freelance photographer for a prominent fashion magazine. Their eyes locked, and for an instant the world around Thomas blurred. He was a husband, a father, but in that fleeting exchange, he felt a new, electric current surge through his veins. After the gala, Thomas found a reason to visit Victoria's studio. They spent the evening exchanging stories and laughter, and the night ended with a kiss that seemed to promise a future of stolen moments. Thomas returned home with a secret that grew heavier each day, and the delicate balance of his family life began to unravel. 3. The seeds of intrigue. For the first week after their clandestine meeting, Thomas was careful. He would excuse himself from family dinners, citing a late project at the firm. The nights he stayed home were filled with whispered phone calls, his mind racing with images of Victoria's smile. Emily noticed his absence but gave it the benefit of doubt, attributing it to the stress of upcoming holidays and the need to finish a building project. On the other hand, Rebecca was going through a rough patch of self-exploration. The art school rejection letter that had landed in her mailbox the week before made her feel deeply insecure. She turned to her older brother Daniel for comfort, who always found ways to make her laugh. Rebecca was the youngest sibling but held the family together with her compassion. When she began to notice her father's increasingly absences and his secretive phone calls, she grew suspicious. However, her youthful idealism prevented her from believing that her father was capable of deceit. When Thomas and Victoria began their affair, it wasn't in secret alone. Thomas' phone was a constant source of tension. He hid his phone in a drawer and answered calls as quickly as possible. He started to leave notes on his desk, asking Emily for a long conversation about the future. Emily, who was a nurse, spent long hours at the hospital, leaving her feeling isolated. She began to wonder if Thomas was hiding something else from her. It was in the days that followed that the first crack appeared in the Harringtons' facade. A single text message from Victoria, sent with a smiley face, had the effect of a secret door opening behind closed walls. Thomas would leave the house with a heavy heart and find himself drifting between the world of architecture and the world of deceit. 4. The betrayal. When Emily's mother's birthday fell on a Wednesday, Thomas was asked to host a small family dinner. He tried to make up for his absence and arrived with a bottle of wine and a dessert. The table was set in the living room, the lights low, the air thick with anticipation. Emily looked at him, her face a picture of worry. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Thomas hesitated, looking at his hands. "I've been busy with a big project," he lied, his voice thick. He tried to convince himself that his lie was a necessary deception, one that would not cause harm. He imagined that if he could get Victoria to see him as a different kind of man, a man who cared deeply about his family, she might leave him, allowing him to return to his family unscathed. That evening, Thomas was caught in a web of contradictions. While Emily's mother slept in her bedroom, Thomas took a taxi to Victoria's studio. He found her waiting, her face a mixture of hope and disappointment. When the night was over, Thomas returned home, exhausted, but his mind buzzed with thoughts of a future that would never be. When Emily woke up the next morning, she noticed a new scent in the house, something floral, sweet, and uncharacteristic of her husband's usual aftershave. The scent made her feel uneasy. She walked toward the living room, but the quiet of the house offered no answer. 5. The resentful child Rebecca had always been the angel of the family, quiet, caring, and always putting others first. But the world she lived in had started to look less like a utopia and more like a stage, where everyone wore a mask. She could no longer ignore the way her father had been ignoring her for weeks, the way she found herself alone at school after class, her mother's sigh after a long shift at the hospital. The truth that her father had been seeing another woman in secret gnawed at her heart. She began to search for evidence. In the attic, behind a dusty old trunk, she found a stack of envelopes. Inside was a collection of letters from Victoria, which were dated back to the night of their first meeting. She discovered a photograph of Thomas and Victoria taken in a hotel room in the middle of the night, both laughing and holding each other. Rebecca's face hardened. She had spent her whole life keeping her own dreams in a safe place, but now she decided she would no longer keep her own feelings safe from her family. She took a copy of the letters and began to plan. The first step in her plan was to expose her father's infidelity to the world. She approached her brother Daniel, who had never been the more outspoken sibling. She told him of the evidence, and Daniel, though initially shocked, began to see the story for what it was. The two started to gather more data, and they found that Thomas had also been making business deals with a real estate developer. The very same developer who had been funding Victoria's upcoming photo exhibition. The relationship between Thomas and Victoria was not only emotional but also financial. 6. The revenge plan. Rebecca's mind was a maze of anger and strategy. She wanted to make her father pay. She also wanted to bring the family back together, and perhaps, to prove that love was not a fragile thing. Her plan was built upon 3 pillars. 1. Public exposure. Reveal the affair in a reputable newspaper. She knew that a scandal would bring a lot of attention and bring her father's actions into the light. 2. Financial ruin. Use the evidence of Thomas' illegal dealings with the real estate developer to bring the company to its knees, which would also impact the family's business reputation. 3. Family reconciliation. Bring the family together, hoping that the public shame would help heal the relationships. She believed that in the end, the family would still love each other, and that her father would come to realize that betrayal can only ruin a family. Rebecca set out to gather enough information. She used her university email to contact the journalist in the Boston Globe, offering an exclusive story about a local architect involved in an affair and illegal real estate deals. She promised her contact information and any further documents. The journalist was intrigued and asked for a meeting. Meanwhile, she began to gather documents that would provide evidence of the financial tie between Thomas and the developer. She accessed Thomas' emails by tapping into the family laptop, and found emails that seemed to be drafts of the contracts between Thomas and the developer. She had found the most damning piece of evidence: a signed contract between Thomas and the developer that had a clause which allowed the developer to buy the Harringtons' house at a discounted price if Thomas would sign a secret property development contract. In that contract, the developer had also demanded a significant cut of Thomas' future earnings for the development project. The contract had been signed, but not yet executed. She began to plot the final steps. She would send the contract to the journalist, and then, in the final steps, she would leak the contract and other evidence to the press. She planned to release the contract in a way that would cause the maximum shock. 7. The plan begins on a Wednesday. After a quiet dinner, Rebecca sat with the journalist, a woman named Karen Lee, in a coffee shop in the West End. Karen had been looking for a big story, and her eyes lit up as Rebecca presented her the evidence. "This is everything," Rebecca whispered, "and this is just the beginning. You are going to bring a whole lot of damage to the family." Karen listened and recorded the conversation on her phone. The journalist's first move was to ask more details: the nature of Thomas' relationship with the developer, the contract details, and the exact dates of the affair. Rebecca provided them and told her that she had the final piece: an email thread that had proof that Thomas was planning to betray the company in the next meeting. The journalist began her investigation. She wrote an article that would not only expose the affair but also the illegal deal. The article was called "The Harrington Affair: Our Tale of Deception and Corruption." It was published in the Boston Globe. The headline made waves: the family's name turned into a scandal. The piece included details from the emails, photos of Thomas and Victoria together, and a contract between the architect and the developer. In the week that followed, the Harringtons became the center of a scandal. Thomas' reputation as an architect was tarnished. The company he worked for received a reprimand from the state licensing board, and their upcoming projects were put on hold. Emily found herself dealing with a lot of rumors at the hospital. Daniel's future job prospects were shaken, and Rebecca was no longer just a teenager, but a woman who had caused a national story. 8. The fallout. The first day after the article was published, the family gathered at the dining room. Thomas stood at the front of the room, his face drained. Emily had tears in her eyes. The conversation that followed was a quiet, tense exchange of words. Thomas said, "I thought I could keep it together. I was wrong. I am sorry, Emily." Rebecca said, "I did not expect you to do this to our family. I never thought you would become a monster." Her words were harsh, but the pain was in them. She saw her father as a man who betrayed her trust. The conversation ended with Thomas saying, "You are right. I will take the consequences." He was willing to resign from the company and sell the house. The family began to realize that they would have to find ways to rebuild. However, the real damage had already been done. The story was now on social media, the comments were full of condemnation, and the business partners had begun to distance themselves. The company, as a result of the scandal, lost a major project with a developer. The developer had a strong reputation for being ruthless, and now, with the Harringtons' affair, he was looking for an opportunity to expand his influence. Rebecca's plan had succeeded in terms of bringing a public scandal. But the question was whether it would bring the family together. 9. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the Harrington family struggled. Thomas left the company. The family's home was up for sale. Emily's mother began to visit them more often. The house had an atmosphere of melancholy. Rebecca had an increasing sense of guilt. She wanted to make things right. She started to write a letter to her father. She asked her brother Daniel to help her with the letter, hoping that the two of them could help reconcile their family. At the same time, the real estate developer had a plan of his own. He took the opportunity to purchase the Harrington property for a fraction of its market value. Thomas' contract was voided, and the developer's influence grew. The company lost many contracts and employees. Thomas's reputation had been ruined. The story spread to a national level. The family began to think about new ways to survive. They found that they could still find meaning. Emily decided to start a volunteer organization for families facing similar hardships. Daniel became the new team captain at the high school, and Rebecca studied psychology. It was a sad, but perhaps, a new beginning. 10. The final twist. Months later, Thomas returned to the city for a meeting with an old client. Emily found out that the meeting was about a new project that would bring them both some financial relief. Thomas was now an architect working in a different city, and the new project was a design for a large hospital in the West. In the city, Thomas and Emily had a chance to talk. Emily was the only one in the world who could talk to Thomas because she was the only one who could still see him. They spoke about their past and their mistakes. Thomas apologized for his misdeeds. Emily did not forgive him right away, but she could see that he had truly changed. Their conversation took them back to the original, but this time it was a conversation that was built on understanding. In the end, the family was not whole. They had broken and then found themselves again, with new boundaries. Their lives would not be like the ones they had had before. The world of intrigue, lies, and betrayal had shown them that there are people who can still find hope in the midst of pain.